I am excited to be here with you today because even I am not just sure exactly what I'm going to say. You know, you had that feeling sometimes in life when you step out the door and you really just you have no control over what's going to happen. Well, that's my talk today. That's my story today. And research even tells us that how I tell my story and how I narrate my story becomes my story. That as we narrate our life, the story we tell about ourselves and our life in this current moment, we actually manifest that in some way. It certainly shapes our future. So there's a lot of power in today, and there's a lot of power in how we're thinking, and there's a lot of power in what we're saying, even if that is being said inside our own head. No one can change what you've decided in your mind. No one can take away your own decision and your own choice about what you're saying about yourself, your potential, your past, or your future. But if you change your thinking about something, some piece of your life that you feel maybe isn't really working, isn't making you happy, isn't making you feel whole, we also have a great power to start now and make a change. That as we just think and envision and step into the feeling of how it would feel to be living that life, that power, and I'm not saying it's woo-woo at all, it's simply science, that we change our whole interaction with life once we've changed that inside story about who and what we want to create in our own life. It's just science. That is the way it works. Often it helps to run our story past someone, a compassionate, wise listener perhaps, who doesn't need to fix us, but who simply deeply listens to us and helps us hear ourselves. Have you ever said something and told somebody something and you walked away totally surprised that that's what you thought, but you realized that actually, yes, you actually did think that, but it was a surprise to you? That's why we need each other in this community. So many times I've sat in a class and been asked a question like, who are you? Who are you really? And we give that multitude of roles and answers about who we really are. And it's fascinating when we share that with our partner and we find that, they say a few things and you think, yes, yeah, me too. That's why in Women's Circle, when we sit in this great big circle of the 28 of us there were last month, and we ask a question, we journal our own answer, we think we're quite unique, we wonder if we're enough. That's maybe my story. I wonder if I should say this, like what will people think, all that stuff. And then we break into a small group of maybe 3 or 4 people, and we share what we feel like sharing, but we share something of what we've written there. And it just lights us all up because we just fall in love with each other because it comes from such an authentic human place, such a heart space, such a safe place. And even those times when someone comes in with tears and is sharing something where they feel that they haven't resolved it, it's still the grist in the mill, it's still, it's Kevin, it's still in the washing machine. We're still scrubbing it out. We're still working on it. But it's a safe place to do a little bit of that. Not over the top, but a little bit of that. Because you know that you're in a safe space and you're held. Many times I've come into this community, into a Sunday morning, and sat there and heard something that I'll say just sort of triggered a sadness in me. And especially in the first years I was here, there were just many times I sat in that seat and cried. Sometimes I cried because the closing song said, "Has anyone ever told you? Why hasn't anyone told you that you were anything less than beautiful? Why hasn't anyone ever told you, how could anyone ever tell you were less than whole? How could anyone ever say that your loving isn't a miracle? And how deeply you're connected to my soul?" I'd never heard of such a thing. I've never heard of such a thing. When I walked in this door, I had no idea why I cried, really, and I had no idea why it felt so good and so safe to be in that emotion. I think what we're all yearning for in our lives and in our community is for someone to really see us, to really understand us, to really make it safe for us not to pretend that we're not sad, or to pretend that we're not afraid, or to pretend that we're not thrilled with how things are going, or thrilled with how we worked so hard and now it's turned out. Don't we all need that kind of an audience? Don't we all wish that we grew up in, maybe some of us did at times, grew up in a home where that was celebrated continually, that we were continually reminded of our wonderfulness. We were continually reminded of how well that day went, even though this thing happened over here. That our story in its wholeness with the wide lens shows us the wonder in the day. Psychologists tell us that we sort of have these two psychological states. You may recognize them, I certainly do. One is called reactive, and that's the times when we are angry, stressed, pressured. We feel like we're really in a pressure cooker, maybe. We're feeling judgmental, critical. We say things that actually bring out the worst in other people. We are, even if we're offered something that's an opportunity to kind of get out of that state, we don't take it because we actually can't see it. We're so stuck in our stuck place. There's lots going on in our world that can trigger me to be in that reactive place where it feels hopeless and I feel helpless. There's times when someone I care about says something to me that hurts my feelings, and instead of using my wide lens of all the wonderfulness and the wholeness that's in my relationship usually, I zero right into, it's hopeless. What am I doing? Like, this is never I'm stuck. Like, it's bad. But we have this other psychological trait as well. And it's the one that says all is well, and I'm feeling totally comfortable with myself, I'm calm, things happen and I'm open, I can think of possibilities. When I speak, I bring out the best in people, and of course it's the opposite too. When they speak to me, they bring out the best in me, and I see just endless possibilities, and the world's a great place to be. We've got both of these. And I think what I've been learning, and certainly in this teaching, I think we learn this a lot, that if I can catch myself in the reactive place where my lens is so narrow and I'm feeling so stuck, I feel like really I'm in a prison. There's bars right here in front of me, and there's nothing I can do to get out of this. It's hopeless. But actually the truth is, if we can widen our lens, we realize that, yes, the jail cell is this much, but everything on this side is open, and everything on this side is open, and so is the back open. And all this is going to ask of me is a change. Maybe a change in my thinking, for sure, but maybe even a change in my behavior. And to change my behavior is really, I would say, sometimes very hard, sometimes a little frightening. And my preference would be that the situation or the person that's causing me my distress would be the ones who change. That's really what that's about for me. I recognize that this is unjust and I don't want it in my life, and I wish they would change or the situation would change so I wouldn't have to change, because actually my position's a little superior. Isn't that how we are? Even though I'm feeling like a victim, and I've got this victim consciousness, which is really what I'm talking about, and I've got my little bag of grievances, I think the world should change for me. I think that the rules in the world should be my rules, because my rules are on moral ground. And they maybe are, and maybe it would be the highest good, but actually the world is what the world is. The situation is what the situation is. The past is past. How much time do we spend wasting our time and energy and hurting ourselves by taking those hurt feelings and bringing that happened 10 years ago and bringing them here to the present moment, putting them back on the mind wheel and hurting again, suffering again? The Buddhists teach us that life is suffering. There's no way we're going to get through this world without some suffering, because there are disappointments. There are things that happen that actually physically hurt us, or people that upset us, people that hurt other people. There's lots going on. You can't get through this life without some suffering. You can't. Have you talked to anyone who's ever made it through? No, you haven't. I'm sure you haven't. That's my story. You haven't. But we're here developing our spiritual tools so that we can shorten our suffering period, or we can realize that we can change our thinking, or we realize we can widen our lens. Do you know this story? And this is a quick version from Thich Nhat Hanh, but it's the story of a bowl of water, and he pours a handful of salt into it. And it's so salty you can't drink it, you can't use it. But you take that same salt and you walk to the big river and you put it in the river, and you can still drink the water. It's perfectly fresh and wonderful. That's us too. When I take my little bag of grievances and I put it just in today and in this moment, it's overwhelming. And I'm poisoning myself. And I'm probably poisoning, the situation. But if I can catch myself and actually put it in the big context of my whole life, my whole relationship, my whole family life, whatever my issue is, my workplace, and think of all the good things too that have gone in here, my lens is wider and my heart is wider. My heart is stronger, and I can handle a little moment of injustice and accept it with some understanding. But when my heart is closed, and I'm just in a very tiny lens, I have no tolerance at all. And I'm actually quite likely to make the situation a lot worse, especially if I react and say something. So what do you do when you have a situation that's hurting you? You aren't supposed to react. You don't want to strike out. You don't want to make it any worse. You don't want it to keep existing either, because you would like to make some changes. And so what is a person to do? That's when you feel you are behind these iron bars of how do you get around this then? So spiritual practice says you breathe. You take a deep breath, you take a few deep breaths, and you let your body feel it. But you don't hang on to it, and you don't not let your body feel it. You let your body actually feel it. And you can even name it, to say sorrow or anger. Rage. Yeah. You can feel it. You just feel it and keep breathing. My experience with this is it doesn't last a minute. You get all fired up. You feel it, you feel it, you feel it, you breathe. You can't hook the story to it, though, or you can really bring it along with you. You have to not judge it and do a lot of reaction to it. You just have to feel it, feel it, feel it. Eventually, it just dissipates, and your mind wanders off on something that's more interesting, and you're over it. And tomorrow you don't really remember it. It doesn't have any ammunition. I'm more evolved now, but myself, I've carried things for probably 20 years with just as much heat almost, and maybe even more, than the time that it happened. I realize that story does not serve my life. I was at a workshop with a brilliant leader, and I was young, maybe relatively, 43, 45, something in there. And she had us each tell our life. She gave us 20 minutes, write your story of your life. And I was working with families who had children with real significant disabilities, lots of medical issues. And those were wonderful young families, young parents, and they often got up and talked in public about their experience of having a child with a disability and their dream for their child's life. So typically I would not have put my hand up to be the one to tell my story, but something in me said, you listen to this kind of bravery all the time, and these parents really are very young and brave to do this. Why don't you get up, unpolished, and just be real? So I told my story. The audience was very quiet and receptive, and the leader said, "You need to take responsibility for your life." Then she got up on the blackboard and drew the drama triangle. Victim, perpetrator, hero. And she talked very nicely about the fact that we all move through this triangle and we can see our whole life and ourselves as a victim, not the protagonist, not the person in the driver's seat, but the baby in the back crying. Or the person here on the side that's kind of telling the driver what to do. But we're here to be the hero, to at least be the protagonist in our story. We want to write the story of our life in such a way that, yes, we've got this big challenge, we may have fallen and become a victim for a while, but we have thought our way out of it, we've sought help, we've worked on ourselves, we've overcome it, and now here we are on the other side, sharing our wisdom, helping others, guiding others through that triangle, being a mentor, transforming what has happened to us in our life. We have the power to create our life. It starts with how we tell our story, or at least telling our story is a big piece of it, because our mind is always talking. Is your mind always talking too? It's always talking. You are not your mind. You are not your mind. That mind says all kinds of stuff that you know is trash. It's not what you embrace. It's not what you believe. It's just always talking. The who we are is kind of hard to say because we're not our body, because that changes all the time. We're not our emotions because they are forever changing. And we're not our thoughts because they're always changing too. We are awareness. That's the divine. It is the consciousness. It is an awareness. It's the silent observer. It's that voice that comes not from our talking mind that says this message that maybe just I am. Or maybe it's the message that was given to Edith Eger, who lived her life in a concentration camp at the age of 16. She nearly died, and she had a horrific experience, but she's written this wonderful book at the age of 90. She wrote this book about her life. She's a clinical psychologist, and she works with people who've had trauma. It's a wonderful book. It's called The Choice. She talks about the fact that when she got out of this concentration camp, she was raising children, and she went into a depression because she had sort of shoved her whole experience underground because she was ashamed of the fact that she had been in a concentration camp in Auschwitz. But when her kids were finished school, she went back to school in her 40s, and she finished a psychology degree, and then she finished a PhD. And of course, she had to tell her story. She had to go, if you're a therapist in training, you've got to go to a therapist, and you've got to work on your own stuff. And so she did. She had to work on her own stuff, and she had to pull this trauma out that was lodged in her body and in her mind. And she had to come to terms with the fact that this had happened to her, and she had to feel it for the first time. She said she actually had frozen her feelings to survive. And now she was starting to gradually have to feel it. And she realized that she actually had to feel her rage. But eventually, when she went back to Auschwitz to kind of deal with her demons as an adult, and she'd been a therapist for a long time, she realized she had to go back to Auschwitz, and she had to walk through, and she actually had to feel it and deal with it. And so she said to the power of the creator of the world, the universe, how could anyone ever do this? And how can I ever forgive them for it? And she said she came to this kind of still place in her own mind, and into her mind this voice said, you need to find your own Hitler within. Well, she just said she pondered that. She couldn't sort of figure that out, but she said there came eventually an awareness that those prison guards that did all the things to her, had she been raised in their homes as a child, had she been exposed to what they'd been exposed to, had she been pulled into in service, many times they didn't want to be, that perhaps, in fact, she could be that person, one of her guards on the other side of the fence. That really, yes, we are all one humanity, and all these pieces of our humanity are actually in all of us. Who says that, the thoughts, the ones you water, are the ones that grow? When we're angry and we water our anger all the time, it grows. She says, don't get stuck in your anger. You need to feel angry, but you can't kind of keep it on center stage, or your story becomes one of anger and you become an angry person. She's become a light in the world. She is love personified, unconditionally. She leads trauma victims from victimization right into wholeness. Her story is absolutely amazing. She's 96, I think, right now, and she's still giving classes and courses, and now with, I think, her grandson. And she comes up on my media feed all the time, maybe because I've often been reading about her, but she's giving a workshop. You can sign up for it. And it's revolutionary, the work that she's done in the world on such a subject as this, a timely subject, I would say. To be working with trauma victims in this time when there's so many of our spiritual leaders are talking about trauma and healing your trauma. How we tell our story creates our life. Our thinking creates our experience. What story have you been telling yourself? Do you have any little story hanging around that isn't serving you, where you're not in the driver's seat? Any little story that's kind of diminishing, that's time to re-edit, to look at the supporting cast, perhaps, in that story? Psychologists call sometimes our best friends, when we have a story where we are the victim and I'm being done wrong, that friend that listens and joins in and says, yes, absolutely, oh, that's horrible, oh my gosh, I'm glad you told them, that person. Well, therapists often call that friend the idiot witness. Or idiot compassion. Because really, a wise friend listens, because you do get a real insight. So you've been fired from your job, or your boss said this to you. Or sometimes, even though we tell our story, if you're like me, so that I look like I'm winning even though I've lost, that I gather all the facts that support my story and I leave out the ones that may give you a little doubt about me. Do you ever do that? So therapists say that's what we all do when we come for therapy. It takes a while before they finally get us down to the grist that's causing our issues. And that we're always causing our issues. There's always something we could be doing differently no matter what happened to us. We are not a victim. We might have been victimized, but we can be the protagonist in our story. We can reframe what's happening for ourselves, and it changes our memory even of the past. My mother was a great example of that. She complained quite often to us as young adults about the decision she wanted to make, but our father wouldn't agree, and so she couldn't move forward. That was a constant theme. She would talk to the girls in the kitchen, but the boys in the front room could hear every word. It was dysfunctional, I know. But that's what she'd do. And so when my dad had a stroke, I really worried about her closure with my dad, how she was, because she did have some of those danglers. She went to a counselor, and because she was looking after my dad at home. She went to a counselor because she just was really feeling anxious and getting burnt out. And she said the counselor had 2 hours for her, and asked her for her life story, so she gave her whole life story. And when she finished her story, the therapist said to her, "Isabel, you've told me a love story. Our mom came home lit up lit up. She told us this, and it just reframed her whole experience working with our dad. And we too then experienced a love story from then on. What's your story? At the end of our life, someone's going to tell our story. Will it be a love story? Will it be a story of us at the driver's seat? Even though, as this wonderful song that led us into this talks about, you're going to try everything. You're going to lose a few times. We're going to fall a few times. We're going to break a few hearts a few times. We're going to say something that was hurtful. I know, we're all going to make mistakes. But let's try everything. And let's really choose to be the protagonist in the book of our life. Let's solve our problems with love. Let's get a big heart so that when little things happen, we can face those little things with understanding and some compassion and some remembering that we too have stepped on someone's toe once in a while. It really helps, I think, as you get older to just realize that the lens is so much bigger. There's so much wonderfulness in this life, so much beauty, so much kindness, so much inspiration, so much love. Let's not have a narrow lens on the news. Let's open up to remember that we are the thing itself in life, that we're here to create a life that's filled with love. Let's serve love as we leave all week in this season of light. Let's be the light. Let's bring a light to situations that feel dark. When we're together, I always feel that my light gets brighter. I'm always more sure of myself, of who I am and whose I am. I see that light, that love, and I feel it in this room when we're together. Namaste.